is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer. It's 1 p.m. here in Washington. Wherever you're watching from around the world, thanks very much for joining us. We're following breaking news. We're on the brink right now of historic reforms to the U.S. tax system. This hour, we expect a vote in the House of Representatives on the $1.5 trillion Republican tax cut bill, a bill that just one-third of Americans approved. That, according to a brand new CNN poll. More than half of those surveyed say they oppose the bill, while 11% are unsure. Let's go right to Capitol Hill. Our congressional correspondent Phil Mattingly is watching the latest developments. So where do things, Phil, stand right now?
Well, Wolf, as you noted, in just about a half hour, the House of Representatives will be taking their vote, and House Republican leaders have made very clear they are on the right track. Behind closed doors this morning, House Speaker Paul Ryan telling his conference to soak it up, basically saying this is the moment after a year of legislative frustration that they've been waiting for. Now, Wolf, Democrats have made very clear they are opposed unanimously to this bill in the House and in the U.S. Senate, but at this point in time, they don't have any Republican help in trying to oppose that bill, and that means that the House will pass the bill in short order. After that, Wolf, it will move over to the Senate, where Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has wrapped up all the votes he needs to be able to move this forward. In terms of timeline, the Majority Leader saying earlier today he expects to have a vote on this plan later tonight. The timing's a little bit fluid here, but Wolf, one thing is certain. Republicans have the votes for their $1.5 trillion tax overhaul. It will be a legislative win. I think the big question right now is, will it also be a political win? You talk about the bad headlines or the bad poll numbers. Republicans acknowledge that, but they brush it off, saying they just haven't sold the bill well enough, or in short order, Americans will see their paychecks change, and that will bring a support along for the bill. It's a gamble that they're taking, and it's one they're willing to take. They believe the policy is the right direction, but more importantly, they believe the need to do something, anything on the legislative side after a rather frustrating year is the imperative they needed to push this over the top. There's no question about it, Wolf. By tomorrow afternoon, President Trump will have a tax overhaul bill on his desk, something that just a few months ago, I think a lot of people thought certainly wasn't possible, at least within the year of 2017.
It will be a major win for the president, for the Republicans in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and a significant change to the U.S. tax structure. Phil, thank you very much. In our new CNN poll, by the way, we also asked who benefits the most from this legislation. Two-thirds of Americans, 66%, say the wealthy gets the most out of this bill. Only 27% say it'll help the middle class the most. But House Speaker Paul Ryan says it's just a matter of time until people come around. Listen.
When we get this done, when people see their withholding improving, when they see the jobs occurring, when they see bigger paychecks, a fair tax system, a simpler tax code, that's what's going to produce the results. Results are going to make this popular.
All right, joining us now from Capitol Hill, Republican Congressman Mark Meadows from North Carolina is the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Wolf, it's great to be back with you. Thanks so much.
All right, it's 570 pages, this legislation you're about to vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. Some of it is extremely complex, hard to understand. Have you gone through this entire tax bill that you're voting on?
Well, I have. I mean, maybe you see the bloodshot eyes that I have. I was up late. I started on Friday, but was up late last night finishing it up to make sure that I have actually read the bill that I'll be voting on here in just a few minutes. But you're right. It is extremely complex. I'm not a lawyer. As you start looking at the referrals here and there that it goes to, it's more important on what is in it, and it is about cutting taxes for the American people, and indeed this bill does that. I feel very comfortable with that, and it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, in just the next day or so, we'll be working on legislation to actually improve this, and we hope that Democrats will come across to help us on that. But it will be a historic day for Americans from coast to coast.
The independent scores or the independent analysis of the bill, and you know this well, Congressman, say there could be around $1 or even $1.5 trillion added to the nation's debt, to the deficit. I want to play an exchange I had last night with the former budget director, Leon Panetta. Listen to this, what he told me in the Situation Room.
This bill is going to add not just $1.5 trillion, but with the gimmicks that are part of it, it could add, in addition to other proposals Congress is working on, almost $4 trillion to the national debt.
Just curious where you came up with the $4 trillion number, because the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, they either say $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion. I know you're a former OMB head. I know you're a former chairman of the House Budget Committee, a former White House chief of staff. Where'd you come up with the $4 trillion number?
Well, it adds up this way. The tax bill itself is about $1.5 trillion, but it has temporary provisions in the bill that involve tax cuts. If those temporary provisions are extended, that'll add another $2 trillion to the debt.
And he also adds in, Congressman, other spending, disaster aid that Congress is preparing to act on right now to get to what he calls $4 trillion added to the nation's debt. Your Freedom Caucus is adamant about not growing the deficit. So how do you square, from your perspective, which I totally understand, this huge deficit increase with your ideals?
Well, we are deficit hawks. Obviously, I've been honest with you, Wolf, that in the short term, this is going to increase the deficit. Leon there is using that DC math. He's not counting any of the growth that we're going to see, not any of the increase in wages for the hard-working American taxpayer. He's only looking at one side of the equation and not the other side. And so as we look at this, I think the key is here, is as we start to become more competitive as a nation, we make sure that our corporations are bringing jobs here instead of taking them to China. We make sure that wages go up. We put pressure there. We're going to see a GDP growth that we have not seen literally in the last decade, probably not in the last 2 decades. And so in the short-term deficit increase, which obviously if we could do it any other way with Democrat support, I would be all in favor of that. We're going to start to see a real growth and an increase in the paychecks. Not just for those top earners, but for the average person that is making a wage here in America, more than $2,000 a year back in their pocket. And so it's critically important that we not only deliver on a campaign promise, but we trust the American people to spend their dollar more wisely than D.C., because you know what? They always do.
You know, Congressman, part of the plan to help offset this huge increase in the nation's debt, this massive deficit that's about to unfold, and the debt is huge already to begin with, almost $20 trillion, as you know. Part of it would be future steps down the road. We hear from some members of your caucus, including the Speaker, that there should be significant cuts in entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. But the president is adamant, at least as a candidate, in opposing any such cuts to these entitlement programs. Listen to what he used to say.
Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it. Get rid of the fraud, get rid of the waste and abuse, but save it. People have been paying in for years, and now many of these candidates want to cut it.
I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid.
All right, so tell us how you feel about that, because you clearly and your supporters clearly believe you got to deal with these entitlements, but the president, at least as a candidate, was adamant, no cuts at all.
Well, I can tell you that obviously we believe that there needs to be reforms in these entitlement programs, but a lot of those, as candidate Donald Trump said, he was not going to touch those. I can tell you President Donald Trump has said the same thing. I've been in the room with him a number of times on those very issues, and he is still very firm on those. So what we're trying to do is look at the waste, fraud, and abuse side of those equations and hopefully just slow the growth of government down. If we really look at slowing the growth of government down, instead of allowing it to grow at 5%, allow it to grow at 2.5%, then what happens is over a 15-year period, you actually balance. But I can tell you the president was consistent on the campaign trail. He's actually consistent now that he's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue on that front. As much as I try to encourage him maybe to look at it differently, he's very adamant that he's going to stay firm with that.
Yeah, he's told me on several occasions he doesn't want any cuts. The Social Security Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. As you heard him say during the campaign, people have paid in for that. They don't want to see any cuts. I know there's a different perspective that you have, that Speaker Ryan has, and others in Congress. But let me get to that other point that you raised just a little while ago. You heard your colleague, Congressman Kevin Brady, who helped write this current bill. You're about to vote on it. He admits there will have to be, and you say it yourself, several follow-up bills to clean up the problems that you're about to create in this bill. There's going to have to be, and you remember, even in 1984, I assume you remember, in the Reagan tax cut bill, which was historic, there were immediately 180 what they call technical changes that had to be made immediately after it was passed. So are we going to see what you call technical changes to the current legislation within days?
Well, I don't know that we see them within days. Obviously, we're looking at a spending issue that we've got a December 22nd deadline. But some of those we may see within days. I can tell you Rodney Davis, who is a member from Illinois, is working with me right now to make sure that the individual cuts for those moms and dads on main streets and the small businesses, that those get to be made permanent. He's taking a leadership role there. I support him in that. And so you may see a vote on that in the coming days. But additionally, those technical changes that you're talking about, we've already been making a list in our office. Hopefully we can find both Democrats and Republicans to help with that. But anything that's this historic and this major is certainly going to need to be something that we actually address some of the technical aspects as we see it. But I'm very optimistic. Not only can we get that done, but I think that we can get that done hopefully in a bipartisan way to address that on behalf of the hardworking American taxpayer.
I know you got to run. You've got a big vote coming up, but very quickly, are you going to vote later in the week for this spending bill to keep the government open and avoid a government shutdown, even if it includes various measures that you're not necessarily thrilled by, including, let's say, $81 billion for disaster relief in Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico?
You know, I just came from a meeting with the Speaker and some of the other leadership staff to be out here with you, Wolf. We're discussing that right now. I don't see any danger of a shutdown, but I do see a whole lot of maybe changes in the way that we approach the spending, whether we do the supplemental as a different standalone bill, along with a number of items. But in the end, we're going to get it done. We're going to stay here, even if we have to stay through Christmas to get it done, to make sure that we do what's right on behalf of the American public.
Congressman Mark Meadows, thanks as usual for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas to you, and a Happy New Year as well. This hour, the House, by the way, will begin voting on that massive GOP tax bill. When that begins, we're going to bring it to you live. That's coming up straight ahead. Also, President Trump's private lawyer is preparing to meet special counsel Robert Mueller and his team as the president remains confident he'll be cleared of any wrongdoing pretty soon. And later, an update on that deadly train crash in Washington State. Was speed a factor in why so many cars careened off the track, leaving so many passengers dangling over a highway overpass with at least 3 people dead and so many more injured? The FBI deputy director is up on Capitol Hill today. Andrew McCabe is the latest official to testify behind closed doors before the House Intelligence Committee as part of the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. McCabe is expected to face questions of bias in his office against President Trump. And this comes as we learn that the president's lawyers are planning to meet with special counsel Robert Mueller and his team as early as this week. The Washington Post, by the way, is reporting that the Trump team is hoping to hear that the president is free and clear of any accusations of collusion. Let's discuss this and more with our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Jim, first of all, what are you learning about this face-to-face meeting between White House lawyers and Mueller's team?
Well, this is not the first time they've met, but the timing here is key because White House lawyers are hoping for an update, a positive update or an indication that the investigation as it relates to the president is, if not at its end, nearing its end. The reason they're doing it now, as soon as this week, is because Robert Mueller has now run through at least his current list of witnesses that he wants to speak to inside the White House. Now, he could add to that list later or ask for more documents later, but because he's come to the end of the list of the folks he's requested so far, interviewed all of them, lawyers to meet with him to get an update with an expectation, perhaps a hopeful expectation, that Mueller will indicate to them that the investigation is coming to an end or will soon come to an end.
And there's a lot of pressure in the House Intelligence Committee. You're hearing this as well, for them to wrap up their investigation, right?
Well, there's a lot of concern among the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee that this is what Republicans on the committee are setting up for. And from the beginning, you've had the House investigation and the Senate investigation because of the numbers. There's a greater Republican majority in the House, so you have a greater majority in the House Intelligence Committee, along with a Republican chairmanship there. The Democrats on that committee have not had as much power or influence. They're not allowed to, for instance, subpoena witnesses. But now that the last interviews, scheduled interviews at least, are going to come to an end on Friday, they have some fear that this is, in effect, the end or the near end of that House investigation. Now, the current acting chairman of that committee, Mike Conaway, has said that's not the case. But I can tell you, and I've spoken to Democratic members of the committee, that is their concern, and that's based in part on the pace of things. The fact that there are no interviews scheduled beyond the end of this week, the fact that some interviews are going to be in New York when the committee's out no longer in session. We'll see if that's the case. But there have been partisan concerns on that committee for some time about how long it will go and how bipartisan that probe actually is.
Jim Sciutto reporting for us. Jim, thank you very much. Let's discuss the Russia probe with our panel. Joining us, our senior political analyst, Mark Preston, CNN political analyst and senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, David Drucker, and A.B. Stoddard. She's the associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics, host of No Labels Radio on Sirius XM. A.B., let's talk about Andrew McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, testifying behind closed doors before the House Intelligence Committee. The Republicans are deeply concerned about him. They think he's biased.
Right. I mean, the knives have been out for him for a while because his wife ran for office as a Democrat, accepted
in Virginia.
And there's always been this sort of stink around him in Republicans' eyes that he's somehow connected to the Clintons and to Virginia Governor McAuliffe, and that he's a partisan. Add the new revelation, which is in this Peter Strzok, Lisa Page emails, as a reference to a conversation in Andy's office, in which they discuss something called referred to as an insurance policy. This is what they want the answer to. And McCabe seems to me, and I go back to 2 weeks ago when Sarah Huckabee Sanders was trying to explain a presidential tweet saying the FBI's reputation was in tatters. She said the rank and file are fine, good men and women, but it's really the political leadership. And so you can tell that there's a really likely push to clean house. The president's been pretty open about that he might start getting rid of people in the FBI. And I think Andrew McCabe's in the spotlight, and possibly, obviously, Rod Rosenstein as well.
You heard over the weekend, David, Kellyanne Conway, the counselor to the president of the White House, she said in a TV interview that all the texts that have come out showing some sort of bias against President Trump, all those texts, in her words, indicate that the fix was in against the president.
Right. Well, look, I think this is something that the president's allies have felt from the very beginning, and they have constantly raised terms like deep state and, soft coup as a way to suggest that the Russia investigation was really some sort of FBI hoax as a way to get at the president for something he didn't do because they just simply don't like him and don't trust him. I think it's important to understand that the real danger here is that a lot of people on all sides of the political spectrum don't trust the FBI. I mean, we went through a 2016 campaign where Democrats insisted that the FBI was functioning out of bounds and unfairly in their pursuit of Hillary Clinton, in the release of the 302 notes that the House Republican committees helped make public because of their requests, and then that late letter from Jim Comey at the last 10 days of the presidential campaign that Democrats believe are responsible for Hillary Clinton losing a lot of her building leads at the time.
Hillary Clinton believes that.
Yes, and so I think what you have here is everybody being upset at the FBI. I don't think it's helpful for an administration in charge of the FBI to act as though, one, it has no control, and B, that there's some sort of rogue element running things when they actually have an opportunity to do things. I think the other thing, though, is that we would all be better served if everybody were able to have trust again in how the FBI operates, because nobody really does. And if Hillary Clinton had won the election and Republicans were going after her, I'm sure that everybody would be singing a much different tune.
Mark, how do you see it?
Well, a couple things. One is the attacks on the FBI right now from both sides are politically motivated. There's no question about that. And just like any organization, you're going to have problems internally. There's no question. But they have an inspector general. They have somebody who's investigating. That has worked. That's how our government works right now. And just talking to FBI agents, the rank and file, so to speak, who live here in and around Washington, D.C., there's a level of frustration. I don't want to use the word depression because that's going a little bit too far. But when you have the President of the United States constantly attacking and needling you, and then you pair it with what he has said about our intelligence agencies and the work that they're doing, there's not a whole lot of respect, I would say, or confidence, I think, in the commander-in-chief at the same time when he's saying he has no confidence in the FBI.
Everybody stand by. We have more that we need to discuss. We're also awaiting the lawmakers in the House of Representatives. They're expected to begin voting any minute now on a major overhaul of the U.S. tax system. The bill's fate is clear. It should pass the House. So why do so many Americans dislike it? We're going to talk about that, much more of their panel. Stay with us. Take a look at this. The House floor, they're getting ready to vote, a historic vote on the Republican tax bill. We're also awaiting comments, by the way, on the House floor from the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. We'll have live coverage of that coming up, an historic day here in Washington. The bill, by the way, that more than half of the American public thinks is a bad idea, according to a brand new CNN poll. Just 1/3 of the people surveyed in that CNN poll approve of this tax reform bill. Let's bring back our panel. Mark Preston, David Drucker, A.B. Stoddard. Why these numbers, the poll numbers, not just our poll, but other polls around the country, suggest that there's limited public support for this tax bill?
Well, I don't think it's a good idea to put the voters down. They've watched this debate, even though it's been on, very sped up to meet a Christmas deadline. They've watched this debate in the House and they've watched it in the Senate. And they've learned that the corporate rate cuts are steep. They're going to be permanent, that their likely middle-class cuts are pretty modest and are going to last 7-8 years. They're a little nervous about the end of some of the deductions. And they're looking at, Republicans are looking nervously at the polling on this because it's almost always in that range that CNN has it. Sort of opposition mid-50s, support low to mid-30s. These are worse than Obamacare numbers in 2010. President Trump's approval numbers worse than Obama's in 2010.
And everybody remembers in the midterm elections what happened to the Democrats.
They're very nervous that with an economy that's chugging on so nicely, unless we see 6% growth, what does this mean for the defense of the Republican majority?
It's interesting because in November, our CNN poll had opposition to the tax bill at 45%. It's gone up 10 points since November to 55% think it's not necessarily a good idea.
And I think this is one of the aspects of politics now, because everything is partisan and everything is split. This is a Republican enterprise. Half the country is going to be predisposed to not trust it and not like it. And one of the challenges the Republicans face is to convince the right voters in the right places, 2018 battlegrounds, that this is good for them. Specifically suburban voters in upscale communities that like tax cuts and usually like to vote for Republicans, but worry that the provisions on the individual side of this tax reform are going to hit them in the wallet. And that's the work Republicans have cut out for them. And when I talk to them privately, they understand what they're facing. Obviously, publicly, they're very buoyant because it is a big win for the president and for them, considering where they started this year with a failed effort to repeal and replace Obamacare.
Our new poll, and you know this well, Mark, has the president's job approval number at around 35% right now. That's a historic low, at least in modern times, at this stage. First year of a new president. And it's surprising only because the economy seems to be doing so well. Look at the stock market, look at the unemployment, look at the growth. Things are moving well in the economy, yet his numbers have sunk.
Yeah, gangbusters in the economy right now. You can look at his approval rating right now at 35%, and you can lay the blame squarely at the doorstep of the White House. It is entirely his fault that his approval rating is down so low. He's decided to be a divider, not a uniter. He is more focused on his supporters and trying to make them happy. Now, look at this tax cut right here. This is a Republican bill. This was crafted by Republicans on Capitol Hill. But if you go deep into the numbers, and you'll see that 76% of Republicans support this bill. That's all Donald Trump cares about. So he's not so much concerned about what the Democrats are thinking or the independents are thinking. He is more concerned about thinking, I want to please those who got me to the White House. Now, to your point, too, how can he go into the new year with a 35% approval rating? And if you look at Pew's approval rating, it was 32%. So he actually looks better in the CNN poll. He needs to change a little bit. I just don't think he's going to do that. He's been so combative, and we are going into a midterm election where he has a very good chance of losing one, potentially both chambers.
Amy, why are his numbers so low at a time when the economy is moving along very nicely?
Well, people are pleased with the economy, but they are upset with President Trump about other things. And Mark is right. He plays to a 35% portion of the country. He spends a lot of energy on culture wars and trying to get NFL players fired. He tries to distract people away from the subjects that bipartisan support up in the 80s and 90s for something like infrastructure. He's rarely talking about policy. When he is, he's talking about how Republicans are going to save the day. Democrats are obstructionist. He actually really had a chance to become quite more popular than he was on Election Day. He could have worked with Democrats, he could have moved to the middle, but he didn't do it, and he continues to sort of enjoy this game of everything being a base play.
Because of the low expectations that everybody had for him and the fact that in many ways his policies are more popular than he is conceptually, which is the total reverse from Obama. People liked Obama, they didn't so much like his policies. He really had an opportunity, but he has never moved away from a campaign footing, whether via Twitter or in his periodic campaign rallies. He goes after Democrats like we're in the middle of a campaign. And of course, he's planning to engage in more of that and in a big way in 2018 if Republicans will have him. And so I think it's going to be difficult for this president to ever be in a different political situation than it is now. Republicans are going to need heavy turnout. They're going to need enthusiasm. And so far, we've seen all of that with the Democrats.
Are you surprised, David, how, and you just heard Congressman Mark Meadows, a conservative Freedom Caucus leader, how uncomfortable they are in voting for a bill that's going to significantly raise the national debt? But hold that thought for a moment. Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic, the minority leader, is speaking. I want to listen in briefly.
Taxes on 86 million middle-class families, and they try to present the delusion that it's a middle-class tax cut. Is there justice in a bill that hands a breathtaking 83% of its benefits to the wealthiest 1% of Americans? 83% of its benefits to the top 1%. Is there justice in a bill that explodes the national debt to give the wealthy and the well-connected a break and sticks the debt with our children? Is that justice? I didn't think you thought so. I wish our Republican colleagues would join us. This GOP tax scam is simply theft. Monumental, brazen theft from the American middle class and from every person who aspires to reach it. The GOP tax scam is not a vote for an investment in growth or jobs. It is a vote to install a permanent plutocracy in our nation. They'll be cheering that later. It does violence to the vision of our founders. It disrespects the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, who are a large part of our middle class and to whom we owe a future worthy of their sacrifice. And it betrays the future and betrays the aspirations of our children. It morally demands a no vote from every member of this House of the people. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.
All right, so that's Nancy Pelosi giving the Democratic view, and you heard her say this is monumental theft, what the Republicans are about to do, monumental theft. But let's get back to what I raised with you, David, the uncomfortable nature of all of these very conservative Republicans, deficit hawks, voting now for legislation that will dramatically increase the nation's debt.
Yeah, well, my general rule of thumb, Wolf, is that the party that cares about the debt and the deficit is the party that doesn't have the power to spend any money. And when you have the power power to spend money, you have to make choices. And what's notable here, and I think you raise a point, because we heard nothing for 8 years but Republicans speak against President Obama and all of the debt and the deficits that he was racking up. But Republicans here were faced with a choice. They could either compromise amongst themselves and govern and show faith in their own philosophy that we needed tax reform and that it will generate economic growth, which will take care of, at least in part, the debt and the deficit. Or they could fold again, have nothing to show for their complete control in government, and not even show that they believed their own rhetoric. And so they made a choice.
There's a disruption in the gallery over on the House of Representatives. They're about to evict some folks who are protesting, so that's slowed things down. Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, by the way, he's there. He'll be the final speaker before the actual roll call begins, so we'll watch that closely. Not a surprise, Mark, that there's been some disruptions. But David, finish your thought before entering.
Well, look, the Republicans had to make a choice. I mean, were they going to actually take some tough votes and govern and pass something that was imperfect, which is the only legislation that has ever passed on anything, or were they going to fold again and make the perfect the enemy of the good? It's a cliche, but if you believe that you need to govern and you need to pass something, you need to make a choice. What's notable is that the House Freedom Caucus, which for years disrupted the Republican House majority's ability to do anything when President Obama was in power, after the healthcare failure, finally understood that it was going to be either a session of failure with nothing to show for it, or they were going to have to bend and compromise with their own principles and do something and hope that it worked out.
I understand that completely. You got to compromise to get things done in Washington. But for years, Mark, these conservative Republicans are saying you got to pay for any of these cuts. There's not going to be any increase in the nation's debt. We're not going to force our children and grandchildren to pay for what we're doing right now.
Short-term memory, Wolf. I mean, look, they're in power right now. They feel like they can get something done. In many ways, the logic behind allowing this tax cut bill to go through and ballooning the deficit is very similar to the idea of let's just support Donald Trump, even though we don't necessarily agree with him, we don't necessarily like him, but we're going to get behind him. And the reason being is they see him as a vehicle to get something done that they wanted to get done. They are now at literally the water's edge right now on this tax cut. They are going to get it through. But politically, heading into next year, a tax cut doesn't necessarily generate enthusiasm amongst your base. What it is going to do, though, it is going to generate enthusiasm amongst liberals who will then try to use that going into November.
And then midterm elections are coming up pretty soon. What do you make of this notion? And you hear it from the Democrats. Once this passes, and it's almost certainly going to pass, president will sign it into law. The next step for a lot of these Republicans will be to what the president adamantly opposed doing during the campaign, cutting entitlement spending, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Wolf, it's not been a year of laughs, but I just find this absolutely hilarious. The idea that in a midterm election year, when the party is completely divided, they're facing headwinds and wave numbers for Democrats, advantage in the generic ballot, they're going to, after passing a deficit-funded tax cut, make it all up to the Freedom Caucus by passing entitlement reform that President Trump ran against 16 rivals in the primary, saying these mean Republicans cut your entitlement programs that you deserve, that you've already paid into. I'm never going to do that. They have enough trouble getting through the week not fighting with President Trump right now, or each other. The idea that they're going to go have all the grannies getting pushed off the cliff by Paul Ryan commercials come back when they already wonder how they're going to find enough support to turn people out, enough voters to defend their majority, I think is the craziest thing I have heard this entire year.
Especially going into an election. But, you heard Mark Meadows, the congressman, head of the Freedom Caucus, just tell us that what they would like to do, and he doesn't know if the president, because the president is adamantly opposed to these kinds of cuts, what they would like to do is cut the rate of growth of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, not necessarily cut the bottom line. Is that something that...
I'm going to laugh now because the House Freedom Caucus used to call that a fake cut and a phantom cut that didn't actually do anything about the problem. I will say this, at the end of Speaker Ryan's press conference last week, somebody said, hey, what about entitlements and welfare reform? And he went on for 15 minutes about the opportunity he sees in the first part of next year. I agree with AB. Politically, I think it's going to be way too difficult. I don't think President President Trump's going to want to go there. But I do think they might make an attempt to do this around welfare reform, which is something that Republicans have been able to get behind before.
You know,
That's just a name.
Right, and we use words like entitlement reform because that's what it is here in Washington, D.C. But for everybody out there in the TV land, what they're saying is that we're going to cut back on your Social Security, we're going to cut back on your health care benefits, on your Medicare, or quite frankly, Medicaid. That's what they're talking about. I mean, they're talking about taking something away, which is the third rail of politics. That's why we haven't seen.
But they keep saying, if you listen to those conservatives, that's where the money is. So much of the federal budget.
That is absolutely where the money is, which is why they'll never address the debt and deficit problem if they don't do it. But these are seniors that would be impacted or believe they'd be impacted. They tend to vote Republican. They tend to turn out in midterms. Why Republicans are going to take a chance in scaring them off or into the arms of the Democrats, I have no idea. And I don't think for that reason that anything major will happen.
AB, how did they do it in the Senate? There were 2 or 3 or 4, even 5, sometimes 6 Republican senators who had serious concerns. But all of a sudden, it looks like once the House passes it, there's going to be a debate on the floor of the Senate, but it'll pass the Senate. Mike Pence is there. If there's a tie, I suspect there won't be a tie. The vice president is the president of the Senate. He can break that tie. But it looks like the president's going to get this bill, even though there were a handful of Republicans who seriously thought of killing it.
You know, the tax reform is different. It's the signature policy prerogative goal going back decades. They waited and waited to get a Republican president to do this. On health care, the debate shifted underneath the Republican Party. The Trump voter who helped him get into office wanted a deeper safety net. Medicaid expansion states have shown that program is popular. They just couldn't repeal it. On the minute this is signed, they're going to start fighting again about cost-sharing reduction payments for Obamacare. They're going to fight about DACA. They're going to fight again. But not one of those senators wanted to be the one who broke the vote. They just couldn't do it. It was too much of a Republican goal.
But they did it on repeal and replace Obamacare, but they're refusing to do it on this.
On tax reform, that's the goal. By the way, the Republican Party never meant to cut taxes for the middle class. They've supported tax cuts for the wealthy for a long time. This is a goal.
As Tom Cole told a bunch of us today, Republicans were put on this earth to support tax cut bills, and I think that's why this was a little easier.
We're waiting to hear from Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, and then the roll call will begin. We'll continue our extensive coverage right after this. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, now addressing the House floor in advance of the roll call on the tax bill.
Thanking all of the members and the staff of the Ways and Means Committee for all of their hard work in putting this bill together. I want to thank them for this. I want to personally thank one of my predecessors from the Ways and Means Committee who helped lay the foundation to get us to where we are today, and that is Dave Camp. Dave Camp did a lot to help us get to where we are. I want to, most of all, commend and express my profound admiration to the architect of this measure, Chairman Kevin Brady. His endless patience and his persistence and his great demeanor have seen this through and gotten us to where we are today. My colleagues, this is a day I've been looking forward to for a long time. We are about to achieve some really big things. Things that the cynics have scoffed at for years, decades even. Ideas that have been worked on for so long to help hardworking Americans who have been left behind for too long. Today, we are giving the people of this country their money back. This is their money after all. Mr. Chairman, or Speaker of the House, is not in order.
The chair notes a contravention of the law and against the rules of the House. The Sergeant at Arms will identify the person or persons responsible and have them escorted from the House chamber before proceedings will resume.
You notice since there's a disruption in the gallery, they've cut the audio, but apparently they've just restored it.
As guests of the House, and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of the proceedings in the House are in violation of the rules. of the House. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, the Speaker of the House.
Simply like to remind my colleagues and the Speaker that my minute can last for as long as I want it to last. I'm just saying. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, today we're giving the people their money back. The bottom line here is the typical family making the median income in America will get a $2,059 tax cut next year alone. What this is real relief for families who are living out their paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. You know, they hear about the economy getting better. They turn on the TV and they see the stock market going up. But now we need to make sure that these people in our communities, in our country who are struggling, see their own personal economy getting better. And that's what this is all about. We got to understand that times are tough for a lot of people in this country right now. Today, this is about how much better things can be. This is about more jobs, fairer taxes. It is about bigger paychecks. It's about faster growth and upward mobility. It's about a strong economy that makes all of us stronger and healthier. Those are the effects. Those are the benefits of tax reform. Here is the heart of it. And here is why this is so vital that we do this. Here is what it speaks to and what I truly believe is a generational defining moment for this nation. Our tax code is so broken that it undermines the very thing that makes our nation exceptional in the first place. It punishes hard work. It discourages our entrepreneurial spirit. It dims freedom and free enterprise. It limits our potential of our own people. When Americans see good jobs going away, when Americans wake up and they see the companies that they grew up with in their communities going away, they wonder if we have lost something bigger. The mission that drives us here today is to restore this beautiful American idea. What is that idea? That the condition of your birth does not determine the outcome of your life. You can work hard, play by the rules, get ahead, and make a better life for yourselves and an even better one for your kids. It is that sense of possibility. We want people to be free to strive, to make the most of their lives. We want a country with the resilience to endure and tackle all of its challenges. Mr. Speaker, economic growth and job creation will not solve all of our problems, but it will help make all of our problems much easier to solve. This is the direction that we are choosing here today, because we know exactly where the status quo leads us. For years, the powers that be have blocked and stonewalled reform under the umbrella of an arrogant, condescending, and paternalistic ideology. An ideology that seeks to limit mobility, to limit aspirations, to accept less in our lives. It's a view of the world that sees life and the economy as a zero-sum game. Your gain comes at my loss, therefore we can't do it. Look at where this got us. The worst recovery since World War II, flat wages, and an economy just limping along. Stagnation is a breeding ground for a class-based society where elites predetermine the outcome of our lives. That is not the American idea. They will tell you this: just hand over more freedom to the unelected bureaucrats and they'll figure it out. They know more. We'll all just be okay. Hand over more of your hard-earned dollars to the IRS and it will all be okay. There's your scam right there. We know, given the opportunity, there are no limits to what our people, our fellow citizens, our brothers and sisters can do. Yet for years now, this tax code has been skewed to the well-connected, full of special interest carve-outs and loopholes. Meanwhile, the hardworking family in America has got to jump through all the hoops that the IRS can muster. Reform means we bring rates down at every level. We clear out these loopholes so that people can just keep more of what they earn in the first place because it's their money in the first place. No special favors, just basic fairness. Reform means simplification too. Nearly 9 out of 10 Americans will still be able to do their taxes on the form the size of a postcard. That is amazing. And given the opportunity, there are no limits to what our workers and our entrepreneurs can do. Yet while the world has changed, while the world's become more competitive, closer, smaller, our tax code has not. Instead of leading, we've been falling behind, to the point where we now are the worst in the industrialized world at how we tax our businesses. We tax our businesses a whole lot more than our foreign competitors tax theirs. They win, we lose. That's not fair. It is basically open season for our competitors to come in and take our jobs overseas under the current tax code. Reform means we go from the back of the pack to the front of the pack. So instead of the slow growth that we've been slogging through for years, we want to get back to real sustained economic growth. We want to build an opportunity economy where there is more demand for higher paying jobs. That's the whole purpose of all of this. Make sure that people can grow up and reach their potential. Make sure that the jobs are there to give people the careers they want so they can reach their potential, so their families can reach their potential. That's why we're doing this. This is without question the single most important thing we can do to once again make America the best place to do business. You know, there's more just than that in this bill. With this bill, we're finally restoring the freedom to make your own health care choices. By repealing the individual mandate at the heart of Obamacare, we are giving back the freedom and the flexibility to buy the health care that's right for you and your family. And finally, we are doing something truly to put America in the lead. We are doing something historic to develop our own energy resources. Some people have been working here since I was in the 2nd grade on this project. After decades and decades in this chamber, we're opening up a small, non-wilderness area of the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge for responsible development. It is the most ambitious step we have taken in years to secure our own energy future. This is one of those times to just take a step back. Let's just take a minute, collect ourselves, and step away from the noise. We talk a lot in these jobs about turning points. There is no doubt that we are at one of those turning points right now. And this one will determine the kind of country we're going to have this century. But too often, we have seen before how doubt creeps in, how the tyranny of short-term thinking takes over, and history fails to turn. There is, after all, a reason that this has not been done in 31 years. This really is a generational defining moment. And let's let this generational defining moment be defined by optimism, not by fear. By the rising aspirations of our people and not the doom and gloom of managed decline that we have become too familiar with. This is our chance. This is our moment. Let's turn at this turning point. Let's reclaim the principles that have guided us for generations. Let's recapture our destiny for generations to come so this beautiful story of the American idea is repeated and passed on to the next generation. A nation more united, more confident, more prosperous, and, Mr. Speaker, more free. Pass this bill. I yield.
Speaker of the House Paul Ryan urging his colleagues to go ahead and pass the tax cut legislation. The roll call will now begin. Let's get a quick thought. AB, what do you think?
Well, Paul Ryan has worked on this for his entire career, so it's a really, just personally, a huge day for him, particularly in light of the fact that there's reporting that he is considering stepping down at the end of this cycle as Speaker. It was a moment of leadership for him, not only this policy goal, but that speech was very aspirational, very positive. It's a different tone.
You know, since the Republicans won back the House in 2010, they have not had a moment of accomplishment like this, and so it's a very big deal for them. The challenge now is to sell this politically to the voters, and they do have a bit of an uphill climb.
That's going to be a tough sell, at least in part.
Yeah, no doubt. Going to 2018, listen, soaring words, soaring rhetoric from Paul Ryan out there saying that is going to be a generational defining moment. I would argue that happened back when President Trump was sworn into office. He talked about this being optimistic and we shouldn't live in fear. I would argue that the country right now is living in fear right now. Not necessarily because of Paul Ryan, but because of the leadership in the White House. And Republicans have a lot to do, as do Democrats, in the new year to try to restore trust.
You can only imagine how President Trump will respond once the House passes it, the Senate passes it. He's got the legislation, 570 pages, on his desk, and he signs it.
It'll be triumphant. I mean, they've been very frustrated, as David said, all year by the failure to repeal and replace Obamacare. They needed a win. It's a big win. And the president is a salesman. He's going to call it a middle-class miracle, and he's going to go on and on. This is a big accomplishment and a big rescue for them.
And it is a big accomplishment. They were desperate to get a major legislative win. They're about to get it right now. And our special coverage continues with Brooke Baldwin right here on CNN.